It's time to get out the broom because it was a clean sweep for Mitt Romney in 3 primaries yesterday, including the big one, Wisconsin.
Now Romney is focusing his attention on the general election and President Obama. Charlene Israel has the story.
Mitt Romney swept the field in Wisconsin, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. It seems the pendulum has swung, and many skeptical conservative voters see Romney as their man. In Wisconsin, they said electability was the #1 factor in deciding their vote. Romney gained ground among voters who've kept their distance in the past. In Wisconsin, he lost the evangelical vote by only 3%, and he actually won the Tea Party vote over rival Rick Santorum. Romney now leads the race with 655 delegates. That means he now has more than half the 1,144 delegates to win the GOP nomination for president. But even before his latest wins, Romney was already in general election campaign mode, upping his attacks on President Obama.
It's enough to make you think that years of flying around in Air Force One, surrounded by an adoring staff of true believers, telling you that you're great and you're doing a great job, it's enough to make you think that you might become a little out of touch.
President Obama is sharpening his attacks, too, taking Romney on in a television ad.
Mitt Romney stood with Big Oil for their tax breaks, attacking higher mileage standards and renewables.
And on the campaign trail.
I can't remember a time when the choice between competing visions of our future has been so unambiguously clear.
After Romney's 3-state win, many political observers say the GOP primary race is over, finished. But Rick Santorum vows to fight on.
Who's ready to charge out of the locker room in Pennsylvania for a strong second half?
Meanwhile, Romney is focusing on Pennsylvania, Santorum's home turf, as he looks to close the deal for the Republican nomination. Charlene Israel, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. Well, congratulations to Mitt Romney on extraordinary wins. And it's time for Rick Santorum, nice man that he is, to wake up and smell the coffee and say, okay, it's time to pack it in. It's been a good run. I've got some delegates. I've made a good show. I've said some important things. And I'll carry delegates to the convention, and I can have a big demonstration, and they can wave placards. But in the meantime, he's not going to be president. Lee Webb has the rest of our top stories from the CBN Newsroom. Lee?
Pat, it is truly amazing that no one was killed or seriously hurt when tornadoes swept across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But we did get an incredible view of the power and destructive force of these storms. Ephraim Graham has the story.
As sirens rang out across the city, residents took cover.
Get in the house!
More than a dozen tornadoes touched down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The National Weather Service called at least 2 of them large and extremely dangerous. One so large, it sent these 30,000-pound tractor trailers flying through the air. This was the view many drivers had as funnel clouds raced towards the highways.
And the car started to shake like this. Almost left the ground. And all I could say, Jesus, save me from the storm.
In Forney, Texas, a grandmother is being called a hero. She took cover in a bathtub with her grandson and 2 other children. At one point, she clung to her grandson by his feet as the storm tried to rip him away.
She saved his life. She stayed on them, and the babies she babysat. She had 3 of them in there. She kept them all alive.
Today, as residents survey what's left of their homes, they say they're blessed to be alive.
I can't tell you how grateful I am that we're all okay.
Operation Blessing disaster teams are in the area today. Jody Geddes is the director of Operation Blessing's U.S. Disaster Relief. She says her teams will act as the hands and feet of Christ.
We arrived on the ground within 24 hours, and so as the sun came up, we came out here to do assessments, and the next order of business is walking through the neighborhood, just meeting residents and homeowners and seeing how Operation Blessing can help them. We have a fleet of equipment coming from 2 locations, Ocala, Florida, and Chesapeake. They'll be coming in within the next 24 to 48 hours with construction trailers, mobile kitchens, just different things to offer relief to the people here in Lancaster and the surrounding areas.
Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
Thousands of homes are still without power in that area, and the Red Cross estimates more than 650 homes are damaged. But as we mentioned, no deaths or serious injuries have been reported. You know, Pat, most of the time these tornadoes strike in rural areas, and we really don't get a view of how destructive they are. But Dallas-Fort Worth, of course, is a huge area, so you've got all these mounted cameras on towers and aggressive news crews, and they gave us a bird's-eye view of what was going on there yesterday.
It went up 35. It was right there in the heart of it. I've got a daughter who lives in Dallas. I have 3 grandchildren who were born in Texas, in Dallas, and my son-in-law and daughter.
How'd they fare out? Were they okay?
As far as I can tell, it didn't hit where they live. Yeah. They live in Highland Park, and I don't think it got to them. But, folks, for those of you who want to help, and we're there on the scene, it's disaster relief. You could just send in a contribution. You could log on. Disaster Relief Fund, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. And we'll be there to help them as we were in Missouri and as we have been in other parts of the world. We're there to help those who are suffering. Lee has got an interesting story after the statements of the president.
That's right, Pat. A federal judge in Houston has told the Attorney General and the Department of Justice to submit a written statement on the role of the courts. The judge said many people were troubled by President Obama's criticism of the Supreme Court on Monday. The president said that if the high court strikes down Obamacare, that could be considered judicial activism. Well, the federal judge in Houston said he wants a letter now showing that the Department of Justice understands that the courts can strike down acts of Congress. He said the letter needs to be at least 3 pages, single-spaced, no less, and it needs to be specific. It needs to make specific reference to the president's statement. Sounds more like a homework assignment to me, but President Obama did seem to back down somewhat from his remarks about the high court, and Paul Strand has that story.
I don't anticipate the court striking this down. I think they take their responsibilities very seriously.
The day before, he was much more pointed, saying it'd be unprecedented for the justices to strike a law passed by a democratically elected Congress.
I just remind conservative commentators that for years what we've heard is the biggest problem on the bench was judicial activism or a lack of judicial restraint, that an unelected group of people would somehow overturn a duly constituted and passed law. Well, there's a good example.
But Justice Anthony Kennedy said last week it's definitely not judicial activism if the court throws out the whole law.
I suggested to you it might be quite the opposite.
He said it'd be more a case of judicial activism if the justices pick through the law piece by piece.
That, it seems to me, can be argued at least to be a more extreme exercise of judicial power than striking the whole.
Matthew Spalding at the Heritage Foundation isn't surprised by the president's attack. But if the court throws out the constitutionally questionable individual mandate that's at the core of the health care law and leaves the rest, Spalding says the court will have made a whole new law, a very activist thing to do.
If you take out the mandate, what's left is now a completely different law, which means, as Justice Kennedy pointed out in the oral arguments, it actually might be judicial activism to leave that in place. It's almost better and more judicially honest to throw the whole thing out and ask Congress to go back and have a clean slate.
And the court has many times thrown out parts of or entire congressional acts or laws, 158 times up until the year 2002, and more since then. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Now, Pat, here's a question. The president's remarks would seem to indicate that he believes the high court has not made its decision yet, but we were under the impression that they voted within 2 or 3 days after the hearings. What do you think the president's motives were here?
He's just trying to build up a head of steam going into the election. That's what everything has to do with the election, and it's public relations. But, you know, he taught constitutional law. He knows better. You know, Marbury versus Madison was that case that Chief Justice John Marshall wrote, indicating that certain acts that the courts had the power to nullify, or at least question, and I have been in disagreement with that philosophically, because I think the Congress does have the power under the Constitution, and we have given way too much power to the court. But nevertheless, in a case like this, the courts are following precedent that has been established now 200 years or so, and Obama knows better. He knows good and well that saying that a particular law does not comport with the Constitution is not judicial activism. And to make a statement like that is nonsense. And I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. He knows better. But he's a community organizer, and what he's got to do is pump up the troops and get the people marching to overthrow the bad guys. So that's where he's coming from. But he knows good and well from constitutional precedent of what they have that the court is within their rights over the years to question the constitutionality of an act passed by Congress. And this wasn't any overwhelming thing. It was a bare majority, and I understand there weren't any Republicans participating because they were opposed to it. So, I mean, he's just playing to the camera, playing to gullible Americans, hoping that he can fool them one more time. Lee?
The head of the International Monetary Fund wants more money from the United States in case the European debt crisis gets worse. Christine Lagarde says the IMF needs to have a cash reserve on hand if the world economy starts to turn down. She cited the European crisis along with the rising oil prices and high unemployment. She said that Americans may think Europe's economy doesn't really matter to them, but she argued that if Europe's economy weakens, it could hurt the U.S. recovery and American jobs. Do you agree, Pat?
She's a very striking lady, Christine Lagarde, very able, very articulate, worked here in America, speaks flawless English, but she's wrong. The United States taxpayers should not be asked to bail out the folly of Europe, and we're not going to do it, however much the IMF may plead. At least I hope we won't do it, Lee.
The president, members of Congress, and other federal workers will no longer be allowed to engage in insider trading. Today, President Obama is signing a bill aimed at stopping that practice. The measure also allows the public to see more of government officials' financial dealings. The obesity crisis in America may be worse than experts thought. A new report suggests the key test used to measure obesity is not reliable. Doctors typically use a person's body mass index, or BMI as it's referred to determine if a person is overweight. But new research shows that that formula often underestimates the level of fat in a person. There's a new and more sophisticated scan available now, and one scientist says it would reveal that between 50 and 60% of Americans would be categorized as obese. Under the current BMI measurement, the Center for Disease Control says 1 in 3 Americans is obese. Pat, the question is, do we really need a test to determine if we're overweight or not?
Right.
Take the tape measure away from me. I will not submit to those tests. I don't know, Lee. Who knows? They've got so many tests and so many scares and so many this, that, and the other. But the thing I want to focus on, and I know that the corn industry is doing everything it can to obfuscate the problem, but I really believe high fructose corn syrup is at the center of much of this obesity, and we need to get to the heart of it. They talk about sugar being bad, salt being bad, this, that, and the other. But I think high fructose, it's in everything, in all the drinks, and it's in so much food, and high fructose corn syrup. And I'm going to ask our staff to do an analysis and talk to some experts to see if we can find a balanced point of view as to the effect of that stuff, because something has triggered an enormous explosion of obesity in America.
President Obama hosted an Easter prayer breakfast at the White House today. He and Vice President Biden joined Christian leaders from across the country for a time of prayer and reflection. The gathering comes at a time of religious controversy. Catholic bishops and other clergy are still protesting the administration's requirement that church-affiliated groups provide insurance coverage with contraception coverage, including abortion-causing drugs. The president has also hosted White House events marking Jewish and Muslim religious holidays. New York City is increasing security at Jewish religious sites for Passover. Authorities say there is no specific threat for the Jewish holiday, but the added security is part of the city's efforts post 9/11 to fight terrorism. Experts fear militants will attack Jewish groups living outside of Israel. The city recently sent out extra patrols to more than 50 Jewish sites after an attack at a Jewish school in France left 4 people dead. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.